Hello, my name is Emma Angel, and today I'm going to talk about what I would do if I was working with these students to help support their monitoring and their self-correcting. So the first thing that I would do when working with that student is I would have them take like a preview of the book. So I would have them look at the cover, the title, flip through the book and look at all of the illustrations, maybe scan to see if there were any words that stuck out to them. So we do a quick preview and then we would make some predictions, maybe some predictions based on the title of the book or some of the illustrations that they saw. Previewing and predictions are really good to start with. So next, what I would do is as they're reading and I notice any struggles, any words that they're pausing on or struggling with, I would tell them just to pause and back up. Let's back up and let's fix up. It's called the back up, fix up strategy. So as the student is reading, she's paying attention to how she's reading, obviously, in the recording. And there are quite a few times where she's stumbling on words, inserting different words, substituting, and having some struggles. So I would have her pause and think about what was confusing, and even back up to some of the context before, some of the words before, and look at the words or even the illustrations that were on that page and think about what's happening, especially when there's illustrations. What's happening in the illustration? Question. I would not just right away give her the right pronunciation of the word. Definitely look at the visuals and have her tell me what's happening, and then go back and say, okay, so did that word make sense based on the context, and see where she goes from there. I would also ask her to maybe revise her thinking depending on her answer, and then say, okay, so now does it make sense? When monitoring and self-correcting, I would want to give a lot of the autonomy to the student, but just be there for like a support. I don't just want to give the answers or give the words, because it can help, but it's not the best help. Also, there are some words that she stumbled upon where the first letter of the word, she said something completely different that started with a different letter. So I would go back and say, okay, so what's the first letter of this word? Now the word that you just said, does that start with that same letter? And go from there and say, okay, let's back up, let's look. How do we pronounce this letter? So can we maybe try saying this word again? Again, look at the illustrations. Okay, does it make sense now? Does it look right? Does it sound right? Something else that can be really helpful is paying attention to who's narrating the story. So in this one, it was the child going on the bike ride with the dad to the bakery. And I would have the student that I was working with pay attention to who was narrating it. Because there are a few times that she made some mistakes, and it had to do with kind of like the narration. So, who's narrating the story? Who's telling the story? Are there any quotation marks or any dialogue tags? If the narrator, what point of view are they in? And just think about who's telling that story to keep track of what's happening in that story. Now, something else I would do with her is, if time permitted, I would have her almost like make kind of like a visual map of the story, something real quick, nothing too crazy. So And that could help with summarizing at the end. So starting with, okay, so here's our characters after she read them. Let's draw quick pictures of them, even if it's just like a head with some hair for the girl and a head with some spikes for the dad. And in some boxes, almost like a flow map, kind of do like a flow map, story map of the story that she's reading. So if she stumbles upon trying to pronounce words or says words that are wrong, I could say, okay, let's go back to our story map and let's see what was happening and let's see what you said. Does it make sense, you know, for the flow of the story? Now, a few times I would help her to reread a word correctly. If she misread it the first time, that could help with some self-correcting. So like that word Erica, she kept pronouncing it wrong. You know, at the end I'd say, okay, so let's practice this word Erica and let's try to reread this text again, this story again, this time with the correct pronunciation of Erica, and maybe explain why it's Erica and not the way that she was saying it. Kind of practice on some chunking and blending there. So a lot of monitoring and self-correcting is just pausing and thinking. So I would encourage her to pause and just think, even if she could pronounce the word, or if she couldn't, if it's unfamiliar, like the word usual, she was struggling with that, and have her think about a word that we know would fit into the sentence and the text as a whole. And then putting that word that she thought of in place of the unfamiliar word. Does it make sense? Now, something else that I might do is, these are some strategies that Pratt and Urbanowski had recommended in their article, Teaching Early Readers to Self-Monitor and Self-Correct. So Pratt and Urbanowski recommended some really good strategies. So one of them was finishing the sentence and coming back to the word to determine what would make sense. So I like that too, because we don't really want to kill her confidence by just interrupting every time something's wrong. So letting her finish that sentence and coming back to the word to think about what makes sense. You know, after she reads that sentence, just pausing and thinking like, what I just read doesn't make sense. Because there are a few times where she was reading and it was kind of like where she was almost maybe thinking that it didn't make sense, but she just quickly hurried on and carried on because maybe she didn't want to think about it. So I would encourage her to think, does it make sense? Something else that Pratt and Urbanowski had recommended was using the pictures, which I talked about earlier, and using text features to understand the text ideas. So using those illustrations, if there's captions under the pictures, etc. They also recommended thinking about what could happen next. So I really like that. That goes along with some predicting. So after she read a page, you know, think, ooh, what's gonna happen next? So after they rode to the bakery, she could make a prediction about, all right, what do you think is gonna happen once they're at the bakery? And then she could read that page, and then I could question her, like, okay, so was your prediction right? Did it come true? And if it didn't, well, tell me what happened. So that could be a good way for, you know, that self-monitoring. Pratt and Urbanowski also recommend connecting with something the reader already knows about the topic. So some prior knowledge there, some background knowledge. So when she reads the title of the book, you know, we could talk about, well, the title of it was The Cinnamon Bun Mystery. So what is a mystery? Have you ever had to solve a mystery? What is a cinnamon bun? Have you eaten them? Do you like them? Where do you get cinnamon buns? Really just probing that prior knowledge, because that could really help out. And one more thing that could be helpful to her, she seems kind of young, but is maybe I could record her, well, she was already recorded, but I could record her reading the book, and then after she reads it, she could have it in front of her, like on a piece of paper, and she could listen to her recording and highlight or mark any errors that she noticed. And then she could reread that text. I'm a big fan of rereading. I think it's really helpful. So after she looks at her errors, she could go back and reread that text after self-monitoring those errors that she made. Not me telling her, but her herself looking at those errors that she made. So there's also really good strategies that we could use when teaching self-monitoring and self-correcting. And that is what I would do with that particular student.